Well, hi, everybody. It's another Conversations with, and I'm delighted today. With me is Jordan Walton, and Jordan is the executive director of the Massachusetts Broadcasters Association. And the reason I've asked him to come is because there's one thing that we all do every day, and we don't even realize we're doing it, is we listen to the radio and we watch television. And Jordan is the one that's responsible for that because most of the radio and television stations in the Commonwealth are members of the Massachusetts Broadcasters Association. And so I thought we'd have a great chat today about something that everybody takes for granted. And you just flip on the switch and there's Cindy or Harvey or whatever you watch, and you're driving to work and you put on the radio and you know the traffic and you know the weather and so forth. And so there's some great things. But Jordan, delighted to have you with us. And the other thing too, that Mass Broadcasters does, they have a great scholarship program.
We do.
And I want to talk a little bit about that in case there's some folks out there, we've got grandkids or kids that are interested in getting into radio or television. There's a great opportunity for them to look at that. And then, of course, the annual awards, sound bites every year. So we have a lot to talk about.
Great.
But I was talking to Jordan, and I think one of the things that happens to folks is everybody just sort of takes local radio and local television for granted. And I was sharing with them the other day, in the big storm we had a week or two ago, Channel 5 did something that's almost unheard of in television today. They moved all their programs to a sub-channel, and they stayed live all day long, and their anchors kept coming in shifts, and they had their 5 meteorologists. Some of them were out on the road, some of them were in the studio, and they stayed on from 4:30 in the morning till 7 o'clock at night with live local programming direct from their studios in Needham. And I thought that was just absolutely unique and unheard of. And so every time during the day, you could find out where the storm was, what was happening, you know, with live reports. And it had to be a huge undertaking for them. And as one who's been in radio for years, who's done it myself with my staff, it's tough when you're sitting there and you're there and you know, and it's snowing, and that's what you're talking about, a snowstorm.
In New England.
In New England,
yeah,
you know.
Been there, done that.
But they did it, Jordan, and to their credit, and you know, those are the types of things that people just don't really understand.
Well, you know, it's something that sets local TV apart from cable news or even network news, is the ability to really get down into the weeds as people are waking up in the morning and they need to know, can I get to work? Should I get to work? Are the kids going to have school?
Right.
Are they going to get let out early? You know, and that's something that local TV, all of the local TV stations that do news in Massachusetts do a really good job of. So.
They do, and you know, for years and years, when I had WARE up in Ware, Bill Putnam was a great pal of mine, and that was Channel 22. They were up on the top of a mountain at one time. I guess they've come down to earth a little bit.
Yes.
But at the time, once again, he was a pioneer. And he had, of course, he was up on 22, which was the new frequency, the high, ultra high frequency. But again, they were pioneers in leading the way. And to your point, when the chips are down, you got to go to your local TV station or your local radio station. And I know we talked about Tom McAuliffe and his property in Milford, and he and his dad and I were great pals, and we go way back, and because we had WARE and we were the same thing. When you get up in the morning, you put us on. We had local news. We used to we had a lot of stringers that went out and cover the different meetings. We did high school football, we even broadcast Little League games, and back in the day, and we had a booth at the Little League field, and every night at 6 o'clock, we had, Monday through Friday, we had the Little League game on, and people loved it. I mean, it was. I mean, I suppose if you did that today, they'd laugh at you. But in its day, and I told Jordan the story about the fellow who told me he didn't listen to radio, and I was trying to sell him some advertising, and then in the conversation he told me, listen to the Red Sox, because our station had the Red Sox, and then they listened to the news in the morning, but he didn't listen to radio, you know. And the other thing that's amazing, and a lot of people don't understand this, the automobile industry has been one of the best contributors to radio ever, ever. And here's what I know. Last year alone in the United States of America, the automobile industry put 17 million brand new radios on the highways of America.
Bless their hearts.
And the year before that, they put 16 million on. And the year before that, it was 16 million. And I used to use that when I was still active in radio, when I'd go out with my salespeople, and people say, well, radio. And then the greatest thing we used to do is the number of radios people have in their houses. They never realized it. And they said, well, I got one in the kitchen and there's one in the bedroom, but I only have two. You got any cars? Yeah, we have two. Well, there's two more, there's four. And we used to do those things. But the thing is that radio has been a major, I mean, I go back to Jack Armstrong, the All-American boy, I have someday I'll have to bring it in and play it. I have a reel, it's about this big. And on it is all the old radio commercials. You wonder where the yellow went when you start using Pepsodent. But, good, that's
Sure,
what Campbell's
Campbell's.
soups are. And so we had all those. And so the thing is that everybody grew up like that. And so the reality of it is, and especially today, with the number of people traveling, the highways of Massachusetts, and they put those radios on. I mean, we have WBZ in Boston that's made a living on traffic.
Sure.
They have, traffic on the threes, and you get the traffic right around the clock, and it's vital. I mean, you can know what roads to avoid if you're traveling or you're going to work. You're going to be a half hour late. One accident on the turnpike is all you need. So those are some of the things. But let's talk about mass broadcasters
Sure.
and some of the things that you do in the course of a year.
Sure. The vast majority of stuff that we do is sort of behind the scenes for our radio and TV stations promoting the industry. You talk about automobiles, and now we talk about the connected car, and you can get Pandora, you can get to Spotify, you can get all these different things on your radio, where it used to just be AM and FM.
That's right.
So it's vitally important for broadcasters specifically to be local and to do the traffic and to do the high school football games and to do that type of thing.
Yep.
So we spend a lot of our time at the association making sure that the public, our congressional delegation, are aware of all of the things that broadcasters do to make them important to their local communities. So we spend a lot of time doing that for both our radio and our TV members. A lot of stuff that we do through the course of the year is sort of very broadcast specific. We do a lot of webinars and seminars, trainings. But we do have, as you mentioned, our broadcast scholarship program. We run that starting February or so every year. So any resident in Massachusetts that's going to college for communications can apply for a $2,000 scholarship to be applied to the fall of that year.
Wow.
So we'll have that started soon. Most years we do 10 of those scholarships, and then we do another for Al Sprague, who was the president of the association for a number of years. Passed away in 2009.
Yeah,
so
knew Al very well.
we created a scholarship, I want to say in 2010, to honor Al. That's a $3,000 scholarship. So we do almost $25,000 worth of scholarships every year.
Well, yeah, and when you think about it, when a young person, 17 or 18 years old, is ready to go to school, and the cost today, you hear it all the time, how they ever are going to pay it back, and my daughter Kerry, I think she got a year to go on hers, and she graduated in 2002 from Emmanuel, and she's still paying, I don't know, $50 or $60 every month to pay hers off, and so how important that little nugget of $2,000 can be to someone who's going to like a Boston University or a Syracuse or an Emerson.
We get a lot of applicants for Syracuse, for Emerson, for Suffolk, UMass Amherst. Even a state school is a tough pill to swallow for families. And we, I go through every scholarship application every year before we send it out to a group of members that do the judging for us, and some amazingly smart and talented kids,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word, in Massachusetts still want to get into this industry, still want to be in television, still want to be in radio.
Right.
So from the industry perspective, we're in great shape. The TV and radio stations in the state, and there's a lot of scholarship programs around
Yeah.
the country. It's an investment in our future to
Oh,
be
yeah.
able to help these kids, even a little bit.
Well,
to get into
one
school.
of the great things I remember vividly when we had WARE, one of the great things you desperately need is salespeople, because that generates the revenue
Hard to keep,
to
hard
pay
find.
to pay everything that you got running, and a lot of times they just take them and throw them on the road, and quote unquote. And when I was involved with the Radio Advertising Bureau, and a fellow named Kevin Sweeney was the principal, goes way back, and he and I were chatting at an event, and he came up with a great idea, and I was one of 10 that was selected to go. They did a Radio Advertising Bureau did a thing with the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School, and what they did is we went there. They picked 10 of us to go for 2 weeks, and we lived there. And the station paid half, and Radio Advertising Bureau paid half. And we went, and we had a whole semester in 2 weeks. We went to school. We had 5 professors. We went to school from 8 in the morning till 6 at night, Monday through Friday. Saturday, we had seminars and things we had to attend. And Sunday, we had an afternoon class. And we had homework every night. And we went, and it was unbelievable. And I met some incredible people there and learned so much that I was able to go back and work with our own staff and really get into training programs, and where you could really train your salespeople before you put them out on the quote unquote out on the street.
Sure.
And I know you run programs.
We do.
When you have your sound bites, you have various people come in. Through that program, I met a fellow named Larry Rabiniak, who used to be an executive with the Ford Motor Company, and he was telling us one of the things we learned about goals and so forth. And he was telling us why the American automobile industry got in trouble. Because what they used to do is they would set to a car dealer, the end of the month, you have to have 100 cars. Well, if they got to the last day of the month and they only had 94, they would come up and get somebody who came in but didn't buy and send his name in anyway. So they'd have their 100. But if they had 110, they'd take 10 of them, put them in their pocket,
Sandbag.
and save them for the next month, because
Sure.
they didn't want them to raise their goal. And the problem was that at the Ford Motor Company, of course this goes back before computers, new orders came in on the second floor, but cancellations were on the 4th floor. So when they'd send in the 6 phony names ordering a car, then they'd send the next day, they'd send the cancellations. Well, it always would take 3 or 4 or 5, sometimes 2 or 3 weeks for them to, so they never realized that they really only sold 94. And they won the trip to Bermuda anyway, But I mean, he was telling these stories. And through that, I met a fellow named Don Beveridge, and Don was incredible. And he and I did some collaborating together. And he talked about, he taught me goal setting, and that goals, in fact, are mandatory. And he used to use the example, if you get on an airplane and your ticket says you have a flight to Cleveland, when you get on the plane, you better go to the pilot and say, is it mandatory that you get this plane to Cleveland? And if he says no, get off the plane quick, But I mean, the thing is but that's what we were able to do with the old Radio Advertising Bureau and this program at Wharton. It was unbelievable. And I came home and I was like a new kid, I had just learned so much from these 5 professors at the Wharton School. So it was an incredible program. And I know that you do that with Soundbites, where you bring these prominent people come in and they talk about working with, I know you had Chris Little at one time, I remember going, and some various different people who were on the road at the time. And one of the great needs in radio has always been sales, because that's where the revenue comes. And, those commercials you hear, folks, those are paying the bills.
Well, yeah, it's funny when you go through 100 or so scholarship applications. I see a lot of stories that were like mine growing up. I played Little League Baseball and wanted to be on the Red Sox.
Oh, yeah.
Quickly realized that maybe that wasn't in the cards for me.
That's right.
So I said, well, hey, how about broadcasting? Sean McDonough was an idol of mine growing up doing Red Sox games. So we see a lot of that. I want to get into sports broadcasting. I want to be on ESPN. I want to do play-by-play.
Yeah.
You don't see a lot of, I want to be out in the street schlepping spots for a living.
Well, I used to do seminars myself. I was on the road for a while doing seminars, and I used to call it leadership in marketing, because they said, well, how come you don't call managing? I said, because you can't manage people. If you think, got any kids, go ahead and try to manage them. See how that works out for you. You can give leadership and you can provide coaching or leadership, but it's tough to manage people because they're going to do what they want. And so, that was always a challenge. But the bottom line was that if you did it right and you really work with people and you could guide them and help them, they could be very, very successful. But I used to see in my seminars, I want to show of hands here. How many people, when you were 7 years old and your father asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up, say, I want to be a radio salesman?
Not a one.
Not a one.
Not a one.
And in fact, most people, because I did some studies, most people who end up in sales say, well, I've tried everything else, let me try sales. They've got a job that they don't like. They don't, then they hear about the guy that's making $100,000 and they go, oh man, I'll try that. And I remember talking to some car dealers. I used to do some consulting work for car dealers, and they had the same problem. They'd get these people that would come in, and you have to qualify people, and I remember the story that Casey Chevrolet up in Chicopee. Remember they had the Chevettes, those little cheap little cars that were $5,000. Well, there was a fellow that came in, and he weighed about 300. His wife was large herself. They had 3 big heavy kids in a St. Bernard, and they sold him a Chevette. And in those days, the dealer had recourse. Well, 3 months later, the car came back with broken front seats. The guy just said, here, it's junk. The guy should have been in a Suburban, okay? They never in 100 years should have sold him a Chevette because they didn't take the time to find out. And I remember when I started to do the doctor's pitch, the very first thing you talk to a client is, who are you really trying to reach? And 90% of the clients would say everybody. And I'd say, that's not true. What do you mean it's not true? You want a 3-year-old kid? How's he even going to get here? Well, you know what I'm talking about. No, you need to specify who's your average customer. You must know by now, who is it? Is it a woman? Is it a man? Are they 25? Are they 55? Those are who you're trying to reach. Because if I can't help you, I'm going to tell you I can't. But my brother down the street's got a great station and he reaches that market.
Sure.
So it was always interesting, and it was always amazing. But again, I know you do sound bites, and I've often sat at sound bites and watched some of the terrific commercials, the terrific public service things that different stations, TV guys, the radio guys have done, and they've often said, what a shame that could be put on the road. I mean, what a thing for people to see. Because some of them are, you sit there and you laugh, some of them are hysterical. Sure. Some of them, you got tears in your eyes, and some incredible talented people work in Massachusetts broadcasting. And you sit there and watch these things and you're in awe of them. And now, we're in the industry, so we see it a little differently. But I bring my wife every year, and she goes home, raves. Oh my God, what a great, and she's had tears in her eyes.
I think being in the industry, you appreciate it more because you've seen so many awful spots and bad breaks where you hear, that you hear something that's really good.
Yeah.
And the Mass Broadcasters now has a website that hosts State Broadcasters Awards events.
Yeah.
So we built our own website where our broadcasters will go in, they'll put their entries, it'll get judged. Yeah. So we now have, I think, 8 states from across the country that do their awards with us. So we get to see stuff from around the country. There's great work everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
We have Montana, great work in Montana, amazing work in Montana. I've judged their television before. Their news is just as good as the top 10 market like we have in Boston.
Yeah.
The talent in the industry is phenomenal.
Well, it's funny. We do a program at WESO when I owned that for years. We just sold it a couple of years ago. But when I had that, every year we did a thing for the food share, and when I got to the station in 2004, they used to have it on the air. And how I knew about it is when I had WARE, they were a competitor of ours. So I knew Russ Dowd very well. And I went there, and they didn't have it on the air. And they had moved it because the program director at the time said it was lousy programming, and he kicked them off. Well, the most they had ever raised was about 11 or 12,000. And I met with Ray and Russ Dowd, and they used to bring the old announcers back that worked there for years. And it was a one-day event. We did it on Holy Thursday. And I said to them, if you do what I tell you, we're going to raise 18 grand this year. Oh, no, Dick, the most we've ever got is 12. We'll never, you know, and we don't set a goal. Let's not do that. I said, I'm telling you. That night, the first day, we did it from 6 in the morning till 6 at night. We brought in guest speakers and everything. We closed the door at the radio station. I locked the door, and we had reached $18,650. And the two of them had tears in their eyes. Last year we did it. We raised $37,000. Each year it's gone up. And that's the beauty of local radio.
Absolutely.
And now this year we're going to add TV Charlton is going to do it. So we're going to have it on cable, and it's going to be on radio and cable. And because the world's changed today. I mean, we're in a different world. Computers, I mean, I remember when I started at WHIL in 1952, and a 22-year-old kid who just graduated from Emerson College hired me. And his name was Dave Maynard.
Yeah.
And Dave was my first boss. I was 16 years old, and I was at Malden, and he gave me a job working on a program called School Salute. I used to get the different high schools to come in Saturday for an hour, and they'd play their top 5 songs and talk about the school. And I think I got $10, you know, every week. And then there's always something great about being in the right place at the right time. And at the time I was writing an article, right for the Malden Press. I wrote sports for the Malden Press, which was the local weekly paper. And I had just graduated. I was involved in sports when I was in the school, played on the different teams. And my father told me when I was a kid, if somebody asks you to do something, always say yes. You have nothing to lose. So I said, okay. Well, anyway, one day, Dave, I used to go on during the halftime and talk about the game because I was the newspaper guy. Well, one day I get a call on a Tuesday, and I had just graduated from high school. I hadn't turned 18 yet. And he called me up, and he says, Dick, have you ever done play-by-play? Yep. He says, well, the play-by-play guy we just got rid of. Can you do the game Saturday? You know Malden football. You played. I said, I'll be there. That's how I started, and then that was in September, and in November, I'm in the station on a Saturday, getting ready to go out to do the game, and Mr. Tallow, who was the owner, came up to me and he says, Dick, have you ever done news? Yeah, I can do news. He said, oh, good, because we just get rid of our news guy. Can you come in Monday and start? And I became the news and sports director, you know, and that's how I started in broadcasting. And well, you got to be in the right. I was standing there, you know,
Hey,
and he needed a body.
Sometimes all you have to do is
That's all you
stand
do.
there.
But it's been I mean, I've been there in its beginning. I saw us in our heyday in the 80s and 90s when we were cash cows, and I've seen the world change with computers and how, you know, and as you talked about earlier, now the old days, now there's companies that own 25 radio stations,
Yep.
you know, and although the one thing you talk about I met with Congressman Ed Markey, now our senator, and I talked to him about allowing AM standalones in small markets to get an FM translator. And he and I worked on that, and the commission at the time was, you know, oh, now they're slowly starting to do it, because I'd call on people who never heard of an AM. These young media buyers would say, "What's an AM station?" You know, so things change. But at any event, it's, you know, let's talk about jobs too, because people can go on the webpage, and there's job availabilities that you post all the time.
We do, yeah. Part of a local station's commitment to their community is to be active when they have openings. So we give our stations an outlet to do that, apart from their own airwaves and their own websites. We have a pretty robust job bank. You know, it's cyclical from time to time. We have more jobs than others, but we have stations that are posting there all the time for openings, and they're openings, you know, that require some experience. There's openings that are great for someone who's just
entry
coming into the
levels.
business.
That's right. No, and with the changes, I mean, I looked at it recently, and I see IT jobs. Well, we never had those.
Well, you know, it's funny. Almost everything, particularly for television, that has anything to do with on air has some sort of digital component to it.
Yeah.
Whether it's photographers that also need to be editing
Yeah.
and editing content for the web.
Right.
You know, the one piece of advice we give to our when we do our broadcast scholarship presentations is, you know, diversify your skill set. You know, if you're comfortable with social media, that's going to help you. If you're comfortable on air, that's great.
Yep.
You know, if you're comfortable talking to people, and you get into a sales or promotion type environment, and that's going to help you too. So.
Well, that's another thing that's become a big component today of television and radio is promotions, and a whole new, almost a new department is developed with doing radio and television promotions, and you see it. You see, I mean, I've lived long enough to see television take all the old radio things and do them. I mean, Channel 5 is great. They got promotions now where you can win tickets to a show. I mean, things that
they won an award at
they were
Soundbites
unheard of.
for I think a breakfast with the morning news folks.
Yeah, and they do these different things now, and great promotions that were unheard of 15 or 20 years ago.
You know, I think particularly in television that the personalities are far more accessible than they ever have been.
Oh yeah.
You were talking about emailing in snow totals during that snowstorm.
Yeah.
You know, meteorologists all the time go live on Facebook in between newscasts to talk about the storm that's coming in or the Arctic cold or whatever they're talking about, and reporters are tweeting all the time and interacting with their viewers.
Well, you know, you talk about the talent. It's amazing. I bumped into Krista Delkamp, and Krista Delkamp's first job was at WESO in Southbridge. She was hired as a young kid doing news, and she started at WESO. And Russ Dowd shared that with me, and I bumped into her at an event recently, and I said, Krista, and I got chat. She was delightful. You know, we had a great chat, and she talked about all the people in Southbridge and her first, and she says, you know, here I am today, and if I hadn't done that, I may not have been here today. So, you know, and I remember you talk about jobs. People would come in and I'd say, well, what do you really want to do? And they'd say anything. I said, well, you're doing that now. I said, in order for me to hire you and find out what do you want to do? Do you want to be on the air? Do you want to be an engineer? Do you want to be, because I have 7 different departments here.
Sure.
You want to be a copywriter? What do you want to do? And they'd look at me, you know, and but it's just great. And I don't think I think one of the tragedies of the local television market and the local radio that we have in Massachusetts is I think sometimes people just take it for granted because it's always been there.
Sure.
And they just flip it on and don't even realize, like my good friend, oh, I don't listen to radio. They don't even realize that they're driving down the highway and it's on, you know, and so I think that's so important. So it's been delightful to have you with us, and I'm so glad you stopped by. I know you're busy, and you got meetings and so forth, but it was great because I think it gives folks a chance to really understand that behind all the radio and television, there's an organization like yourself that goes to Washington every year and meets with the delegations to make sure that I know every year they're trying to file bills that change this and move that and charge us for this and tax that.
That's about right. Yeah.
You know, and you have to work on that. And I see a great thing. I know for years and years, radio and TV stations had these incredible non-compete contracts that would tie somebody up for months. And I see that the Mass Legislature now is starting to get involved in that and going to undo some of those, which is another thing. Now, I don't know whether it's good or bad or what side of the
That's
fence
something we haven't weighed in on yet.
you stay out of that one.
Yeah, we might.
Stay out of that one. But and the future is good.
You know, radio in particular has been around for 100 years, and people keep calling for its death, and it keeps chugging along, and I think TV is going to be very much the same way. And the influx of cord cutting, you know, antennas are making a huge comeback, which is kind of funny to see.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing too is, like you said about radio and even television, while it's something we take for granted, it keeps inventing itself. And it has to. I mean, I remember when we used to have a turntable, and I'd put a record on and you'd cue it, and you'd slip start it and say, now here's Patty Page, and she'd start singing. Well, Today, everything's on a computer. You know, the next event just plays, you know. And we've got stations that have 2 announcers or 3, and they're on 3 different stations, and they can do a whole 3-hour program in 22 minutes by just putting in the, you know.
Frees up a lot of time for
Yeah.
productions
and other
all
things.
the other fun stuff they
You know,
do.
and so it makes it interesting. So, but Jordan, thanks a bunch for stopping by. It was terrific.
Thank you
And
for
I'll see you
having me.
again soon. My pleasure. There you are, folks. That's another Conversations With.